So this morning's Torah portion is out of Genesis 47 to Genesis 50, and it is called Vayechi. And essentially, this speaks of the history of where Jacob and his sons arrived in Egypt, where Joseph is now second in command, essentially. And they've arrived there safely and now are under the essentially provision that Father has given through Joseph, and all that has happened. And this is a point in time where Jacob is becoming older, and he asks his son Joseph to come to him and promise him that he will bring his bones back to the land of Canaan, where Father said he will give this land to them. And so he asks Joseph to promise that. And then a couple of years go by, and then he reaches the point where he says, I want to bless my sons. Bring your sons, speaking to Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and then also the rest of his own sons, Jacob's own sons. And he blesses them. But in the middle of this blessing them, in Genesis 49, verse 18, he's just blessed Dan, and he makes almost a pause. There's a proclamation, a crying out from his heart saying, for your deliverance I've waited, O Yahweh. And it's in the middle of a blessing. It's in the middle of a thought almost. And I was stuck on this. Why? What is going on there? And I was just thinking, what is he expecting? What is he waiting for? And we know when we start looking at the Hebrew, we can dig in a little bit there. So we're going to look quickly at what this is about. But before we get there, this morning I want to essentially speak of our expectation. What are we expecting? What are we looking towards? What are we hoping for? What are we waiting for? Where's our attention? And we've been speaking on this topic essentially for the last couple of weeks. So I don't want to rehash everything again, but I want to draw your attention to a little bit of something else in terms of prophecy. So before we get to the meat of this, I quickly want to lay a bit of a foundation. And we find this foundation where the disciples of Yeshua, they approach him and they say to him, Master, when will the coming of the end of the age be? How will we know? When will this happen? And Yeshua answers them and he says to them, there will be lots of deception going on. There will be many false prophets. There will be wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, ethnos against ethnos, creeds, race, cultures against cultures. There will be scarcity of food. There will be deadly diseases, plagues across the earth. And there will be many chaotic, terrible natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, all those things, floods. There will be a massive increase in lawlessness. And remember, we can actually say there an increase in Torahlessness. And what happens from lawlessness? Death flows out of that. That is the fruit of lawlessness. And interestingly, Yeshua refers to something in Daniel 11. He says, when you see the abomination set up in the temple, flee. So even Yeshua draws back to prophecy continuously. But then he says to them, and after you've seen all these things, and as you are witnessing these things, just know that this is just the beginning of birth pains. And as you know, especially the ladies, but we all know that birth pains it starts out and increases in severity, in frequency and intenseness. And so that is what birth pains are. But what does birth pains lead to? And that is, I think, what I want to focus on today. So endure until the end, because after these birth pains, there is a birth. So endure. Now, also we see in 1 Thessalonians 5, where Yeshua says, the day of Yahweh will approach as a thief in the night. It will come unexpectedly. It will come suddenly. You can't necessarily plan fine details at what hour will this thief break in. But those in the light, on the other hand, will know the season and the time. So I believe we will know that time is maturing, it is ripening, something is happening and moving. And I think we feel like this now, but remember that generations before us have felt the same. But again, we can look at prophecy and we can say, how many things are starting to fall in place? How many things are lining up? And we can see more and more things are starting to fall in line. And it says there that those in darkness will say that all is fine. Everything is okay. Go on as normal. Everything is safe and peaceful. But they are blind to the truth of Torah, the truth of Yahweh. And they are also haters of this truth. One of the signs of the end is that the world will call that which is good, they will call that evil. And that which is actually evil, they will call that good. And we see that happening in the world today. We've heard this so many times. When they say peace and safety, we can say it another way. Some translations say peace and security. Then suddenly destruction comes upon them. So this is the side where Yeshua is speaking. This is the side of light, informing us of what is laying ahead. Speaking of warning of what the world will say. They will say there's peace and safety, but suddenly destruction will come. But what does the United Nations say? So the United Nations is referred to as the guardian of peace and security. And they actually have a day of celebration that they refer to the Day of Peace, which happens every year on the 21st of September. And it is a good thing. I mean, their message essentially says, the world must stand together. We must lay down our differences. We must fight for peace. We must stand up for peace. We must reconcile. So it sounds so good, doesn't it? It sounds right. Shouldn't we hope for peace? Shouldn't we reconcile? Shouldn't the world aim for peace? The thing is, it sounds right, sounds good, but what are you standing on? On what side are you? Because on the one hand, are you on the side that says destruction will come, but then there's birth, there's renewal? Or are you saying, no, all is fine, but then while you're saying all is fine, you are denying truth, you are denying Torah, you are blind to light. So, the United Nations, they have a guardian of peace. And I actually referred there, I say the UN guardian of peace, but it's the unguardian of peace actually. It is a strange looking statue that's been recently unveiled. I don't know if you saw that. And I'm not going to focus on this. I'm just literally going to quickly mention and then move on. But there's a strange looking statue that's been set up outside of the United Nations headquarters in New York. And it's inspired by the Aztecs. It was given by Mexico. But the Aztecs is if you know a little bit of history, the Aztecs was a bloodthirsty culture. Human sacrifice. Cruel. And so that is the statue that they have been given by Mexico, and United Nations have set that up outside of their headquarters. And they say that this statue is now called the Guardian of Peace. The Guardian of Peace and Security. Guardian of Peace and Safety. Interesting. Now, quickly, it looks like a leopard. It's got wings like an eagle. It's got a mouth of a lion. And it's got feet like a bear. So in Daniel 7 verse 3-4, we see references to something like this. Okay, so we see the beast coming out of the sea, and it looks like a lion. It had eagle's wings, and I was looking until its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and it was given a man's heart. So we see a little bit of a glimpse here of something that draws our attention, but then, so note the eagle's wings there. And then in Revelation 13, we also see And the beast I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the feet of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his throne, and great authority. So there's a similarity with this leopard, and the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion, and so on. So we see these connections that we can quickly draw on. But is that simply just coincidence? There are many striking similarities that we cannot really ignore, but there's a big wait. If you read these verses in context, not everything fits 100% yet. So why am I mentioning this? Essentially, why I want to mention this is that we can get so drawn with something that grabs our attention, and then we get so focused on this. You could look at the statue and say, oh wait, this is a fulfillment of this exact prophecy. But then, if you are honest, you'll see that it doesn't fit 100% yet. There are still things that does not match up 100%. But more than that, what is behind this thing? They don't attribute any real power to this statue. They are attributing their way of being able to give peace and safety and security. They attribute that to their truth, and their truth is science. Their peace and safety is enforced maybe by the foot of a bear or the mouth of a lion through force. So, is that the true peace and safety? What does God say about that? Well, we know in Psalm 119, verse 142, that it says there that His Torah is truth and is everlasting. We also know that Yeshua says there in John 14, verse 27, that He will give us peace, but not a peace like that the world can give. He gives us a peace that surpasses all understanding. He gives us a peace that doesn't matter what your circumstances are, you are still full of well-being and calmness. And we also know, for example, from Psalm 91, verse 2, that He is our fortress. He is the one that we find security within. All right. So, what is the point now? So, with prophecies, I'm not actually speaking about prophecies today. Because Scripture is full of prophecies. There's a multitude of prophecies. But the thing is, one can get caught up and get distracted. There's so many theories and possibilities out there. And I'm not only speaking about prophecy now, I'm speaking in general. Everyone has a theory. Everyone has an opinion. And we can get caught up in these things. But remember that prophecy is simply a finger on a hand, actually, pointing towards something. Now, it's pointing in a direction. Don't get so focused on the finger that you forget to what it's pointing to. So, there's a bit of a picture that just shows an arrow, and we can discuss the arrow. The arrow is the finger. We can look at the arrow and we can describe its dimensions. We can discuss its shape. We can have various opinions. Is that a raised arrow, or is it embedded in the material? We can focus so much on the arrow, but what is the arrow pointing to? It's pointing to, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. So prophecy points to something. Let's not get too focused and distracted on the prophecies themselves, but let us remember what they are pointing towards. Now, remember when we spoke about Jacob's words, where he says, I have expectantly waited for your deliverance. In Genesis 49 there, he says, for your salvation I wait. That's one translation. It's interesting to me, though, that observant Jews, they pray a prayer 3 times a day for the coming of Messiah. And they base the words of that prayer on these words from Jacob. And the prayer essentially goes, Cause the branch of your servant David to blossom forth speedily. And remember, by the way, that they would often pray this in Hebrew. Cause the branch of your servant David to blossom forth speedily, and lift up his horn through your salvation. So lift up his authority through your salvation. And as they say the word salvation, they are in Hebrew saying Yeshua. For we await your Yeshua every day. Blessed are you, Yahweh, who causes the horn, the authority of salvation of Yeshua, to blossom forth. So we see there, let's just quickly stop and look at these words. The word waited there in the English translation is kavah in Hebrew. And kavah means to wait or to look for, but it also has a meaning in terms of hoping or expectantly waiting for something. There's an expectation, there's a hope. And then the words there in English, deliverance or salvation, we know that in Hebrew it actually says there Yeshua. And Yeshua is, we know, the salvation, deliverance by God, welfare, victory over the enemies. So we can legitimately actually read that verse saying, I have hoped for, I have expected for your Yeshua, O Yahweh. Now this is interesting because this is in Genesis. This is Jacob saying this. And I want us to realize that even from the beginning, there is a hope. There's an expectation. Now the question then is, what are we storing up? What is our hope? What are we carrying around? So, we carry around all kinds of things in our heart, but the heart speaks of, obviously, of our minds, our thinking. Normally, we would store up things that are of value to us. So, that which you find valuable, you will store that up. You'll protect that. You will guard that which is valuable. Now, in Matthew 6, Yeshua says, for where your treasure is, there your heart shall also be. So, if you know what you are storing up and what is valuable to you, you know where your heart is, where your mind is, what you are thinking of, what is important to you. So the question then comes, what is your treasure? I know I'm speaking here to believers. I'm speaking to the converted in essence. But, we say so easily, our treasure is Yeshua. We know the pearl of great value. We say these things very easily. But to really find out what your treasure is, there's actually 3 simple questions I think we can ask ourselves. What do you spend your free time on? What do you focus your attention on? So, what do you let in through your eyes? What news do you read? Who do you listen to? What conversations are you part of? And what does your thoughts dwell on? Those 3 things can very quickly and very easily show you what your treasure is. Because if we are all honest, I think we probably fall short a little bit in many of these aspects. And I've been challenged a lot about this myself. But it's especially the 3rd point that really influences us a lot. What does your thoughts dwell on? Because what you think influences your emotions, it influences your actions, your behavior, your words. Everything is influenced by what you fill your thoughts with, what you fill your thinking of. So, I was watching a movie with the children the other day, and it was just there was nothing special about this movie. But there was a little happening in the middle of this movie where it was essentially, the world celebrates the end of the year at the 31st of January, and then they fire fireworks and they have big celebrations, and this little girl was saying to her mom, Mom, when it's the end of the year, do you also think that it may be the end of the world? And her mom says, no, it's only the beginning. And so that got me thinking, and that's why we are speaking of this quickly this morning. Some fear the end of the world. The other day, James was speaking of the revelation, the apocalypse. And the world looks at the apocalypse a certain way. They see destruction and catastrophe, death, and they fear that. They want to avoid that. And there's lots of movies about these horrific pictures that they've envisioned about what the apocalypse will look like. But then, on the other hand, the same word apocalypse means revelation of Yeshua, Him being revealed, His authority being established. And it reminded me of, that cloud that moved ahead of Israel as they came out of Egypt. And Father was leading them towards a hope, towards a future, towards a promise. And He's leading them, He's literally guiding their way after delivering them with a mighty hand out of Egypt. And they are now walking, and then suddenly they hear a noise behind them. They see a bit of a dust cloud. And they turn around and they see, oh dear, Pharaoh is chasing us. And what happens? They get scared because their attention suddenly turns away from where they are headed, away from the cloud that's before them, and they turn essentially their backs and they look towards Pharaoh and they get fearful. And then what happens? You remember, this is a mixed multitude that's come out of Egypt. It's not only Israel anymore, it's everyone who came out of Egypt with Israel who said, we will now follow this God of Israel. And so now they are walking in this direction. Now they're all there, and suddenly this cloud moves and stands between Israel. And Father says, I will put myself between Israel and Mitzrayim, Egypt. And Father essentially there refers to all these people, this mixed multitude, Israel and everyone else. And He calls them all Israel. He says, they are my people. And he moves Himself between them. And we know the story well. And on the side of Israel, it was light. And on the side of Egypt, it was darkness and clouds and thunderings. So, are you excited about what lies ahead? A lot of courageous amens. But we should actually have something to be excited about. But let's be honest. There are some difficult times that's going to lie ahead. Let's not be ignorant of that. So yes, we do have a reason to be excited. For sure. For sure. Some fear death. But I think, to be honest, many fear maybe the pain that they fear they might go through. The suffering. They don't want to suffer. So maybe that's one of the big things. But when we look at the end of the world or we look at death, we should realize that it is only the beginning. As the world, fires their fireworks and celebrates the end of the year, it is actually just the beginning. And so for us, it is the same. All these things, as Yeshua said, they are birth pains leading up towards something. So we know when the disciples approached Yeshua, at one point they asked Him, teach us how to pray. And we know the famous and very well-known prayer. And in there, Yeshua says, thy will be done, your kingdom come. His will be done on earth, His kingdom be done on earth and come on earth as it is in heaven. So His kingdom will be established. And we see there in Daniel 2, verse 44, it says there, for example, and in the midst of this, before I read that, remember, this is going to happen at a time when Yeshua comes to establish His kingdom. There are currently other kingdoms on this earth. There are other people that wants to have power. There is another one that wants to have power. And so, this says, and in the days of these kings that are now currently on earth, and they are physical and spiritual, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And this kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And it shall stand forever, this kingdom of Yeshua. And that for me is exciting. It gives us hope. Now, what will happen to these kingdoms? Will they simply obey? Will they simply perish? Will they be wiped out? Well, Isaiah 2, for example, speaks of how the nations will go up to Mount Zion to be taught. They will ask, teach us your Torah. So there is even hope for them. The ones that remain, we know in Ezekiel 14, those who have been left from among the nations, who do not go up to Egypt to celebrate the festival of Sukkot, there will be no rain on them, and there will be a plague on them, and so it will be with the other nations. So there will be other nations on this earth, but over time, they will be taught. So there's hope. There are many prophecies. There are many beautiful things that we can speak of about the kingdom. One of them is that each man will say to his neighbor, come sit under my fig tree, which speaks of abundance. It speaks of blessing. It speaks of harvest. There are other prophecies saying, the harvest will be so plentiful that people will not be able to keep up. There will just be so much abundance. But why? Why will it go so well in the kingdom? I believe, honestly, one of the big reasons is a lack of lawlessness. Because now there's an increase in lawlessness, and we see destruction and death, chaos, earthquakes, plagues, diseases in this earth. There's lawlessness. So that's the fruit of lawlessness. But in the kingdom, Father says, when you walk in my ways, as I teach you the Torah, there will be blessing. And the earth, the creation, responds to this. Creation responds to walking in Torah, when the people walk in Torah. And we know, ultimately we see that as a picture of someone teaching. And we know one day Yeshua will teach us. He will teach the nations. And that's for me exciting, to be honest. We started out speaking about Jacob, calling out and saying, I expect for your Yeshua. And then Yeshua says, when all these things happen in the earth, disasters, false prophets, all these deceptions, plagues, diseases, wars, rumors of wars, all those things happen. It's only the beginning of birth pains. Now, but that's been going on for a while now. And it is increasing. It is escalating in severity, I believe, and frequency. Now, even though birth pains are painful, I'm sure, I've heard, birth pains come with a promise of birth. And among many things, birth speaks of something. It speaks of hope. It speaks of newness. It speaks of potential, a fresh start, a new body. When the resurrection happens, I'm sure many of us will celebrate the fact that we will have a new body. There will be curiosity, and that's one of the things I'm looking forward a lot, is to go and explore this creation. I don't think we'll be simply limited to what we are currently limited to. I think there are things that we cannot even imagine, obviously, as Yeshua said. I'm very excited about the potential in the future, this promise of our Father that He's given us. When a mom becomes pregnant, she immediately starts dreaming, maybe, hopefully, along with her husband, about this baby. She dreams about this future. She dreams and hopes for what lies ahead with this baby. And she focuses on this excitement of this baby that's coming. She speaks to everyone about this baby. To her mom, to her friends, everyone hears about the fact that there's a baby on the way. And what's interesting is that to everyone else, besides the mom, the idea of this baby is mostly intellectual. It is you can see maybe from the tummy, you can see from the radiation, or not the radiation, the radiating, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh dear. Yeah, she radiates. There's something beautiful. Oh dear. So I'm glad that you can laugh at that at least, and I as well. So, there's something beautiful that we can see. But yet, for the mom, it is very real. She carries this baby. It is with her. She feels the baby move. It is part of her. She changes along in the process. But everyone on the outside just looks on. And to them, they are not so intimately connected. Maybe the father to a degree, but generally, mostly, it is the mom that feels this baby. It's real. To the others, they will only see the baby once the baby is born. Now, the thing is, before we get there, I think the question for us then is, shall we, when we are walking around in this earth, how shall we be seen? On the one hand, we can be like the world and say all is fine, peace and safety and wellness and security, but the underlying foundation of that is not the Word of God. It is not His truth. It is not His security. That's the one option. The other option is, you look at Father's promises. You look at His character. You look at what He has said and what He has done already. And in that, you've got a trust and a hope and excitement for what lies ahead. And I believe that we should be like that mom that carries in us an expectation, a hope for something that is coming. I know we don't birth the kingdom. In a way, we are actually the kingdom. We are already walking in the ways, we're starting to walk in the ways of this kingdom. But there's a greater promise, there's a greater hope. And I hope that in your thinking, perhaps, in your reaction to the things in the world, even when going through difficult things, that for a moment you can lift up your eyes, you can raise your eyes, you can raise your expectation and your hope and look up and say, these things are temporary. These things shall be overcome. These things will pass. And you have a hope. You've got a promise of something beautiful that lies ahead. And for me, I think ultimately, as believers, we have so many promises. There's such a great expectation that we can carry around. And all that is based on trust. That is why we are called believers. But it shouldn't just be an intellectual thing. It shouldn't just be something that you know of and are aware of, and then you move on. No, I think it should affect us in our daily behavior, in our way of speaking, in our way of thinking and reacting to the things in the world. We should be like this mom, that as she becomes more and more, as the time for the birth comes closer, she changes more and more. And so we should also, as we get closer to the kingdom, the time of the kingdom, we should be changing. And people should see in us this radiating glow, this beautiful change that's happening in us. And I hope, that maybe, I know there are some, I've spoken to a couple of people, and many have told me that they don't necessarily feel this hope, this expectation. They may not feel this at the moment. And maybe you are there. So I want to encourage you. Normally after our discussions, after our teachings in the morning on Sabbath, what we've started doing is having these group discussions afterwards. And there are normally times to discuss and think about these ideas. But this morning what I'd like to do is use that time for prayer. So if you feel nervous, if you feel there are things in your life that you'd like to change and lay down, if there are things that you are spending time on that you shouldn't be spending time on, if there are things that's occupying your thinking that you'd like to lay aside, ask for others to pray with you. And maybe in the group, if you don't feel like exposing all that, at least maybe I would suggest come speak to one of the elders, or come draw alongside someone that you trust, at least to say, pray with me. Walk a road perhaps with me. Let us start encouraging one another. Let us in this time now also afterwards, let us pray together for those who are blind, those who are deaf. There are, it's not only the physically deaf and blind. We are speaking spiritually blind and deaf. We should be praying for them. We want as many as possible to experience this joy of this kingdom. And so therefore we should be sharing this hope and expectation and interceding as Yeshua did for those who are not there yet. So let us use this time now afterwards to quickly to pray about this. But don't make it a thing where it's only a now thing. If there's something really deep in your heart that you feel you're not there, you don't have this excitement about this kingdom, you don't feel this hope, you know about it intellectually, but you don't feel it, don't just leave it. Earnestly seek Father for Him to change your heart in that. And let's pray about that together. So, I'll leave this up for you to refer to as we're going to gather in groups. But before I do that, before we break up into groups, are there any thoughts or questions that you'd quickly like to ask based on the context of what we spoke about this morning, or what I spoke about this morning? Is there something specifically that you'd like to say or ask? Das was a Gordon? Mm. Yeah. For those who didn't hear, let me just quickly put some. I'll try and convey what Karen was saying. She's essentially saying that, Yeshua promised us and said we will have trouble in this world. It won't always be smooth sailing, and as we experience difficult things, let us turn to Father and ask Him, Father, may this trouble, may this difficulty, may it not be in vain. Use this fire essentially to cleanse us, to change us, to renew us. Use this to mold us and shape us. So turn that into turning to Father, to say, Father, help in this situation and change me. So essentially, is that correct, the interpretation essentially? Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, we need faith.
It says, I think in John, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Where you focus, take heart, I have overcome.
Yes, Yeshua says, we will have trouble, but take heart. He has overcome this world and its things and these kingdoms. And I believe, in a way, if we read Paul, we see this battle that he deals with. On the one hand, there's the promise of newness, of victory over sin, for example. But then he battles with his shortcomings. He battles with the reality of his current being. And so in our reality today also, we have a reality of our flesh that experiences fear sometimes, that gets a bit nervous. When the money runs short, or when we are sick, or we lose someone that we care about, or something isn't well, we have a reaction in our flesh. So Paul is speaking often about these things, especially in Romans 7 and 8. But Yeshua says, I have overcome these things. And what is he speaking of? There are many things that we can draw from that, but I think one of the biggest ones that we can draw on is, the promise of a resurrection, the promise of a kingdom. He has dealt with death. He has dealt with the consequences of the things in this world. And so as we go through this world, we know that it will come to pass, because ultimately our hope is in Him, and He is the first fruits of that promise of conquering and overcoming the result of sin and death. And so we have a hope in that. He has conquered this world. He has conquered death. And we will then as well, obviously. Not by our own strength, but by Him who does it. All right, I think let us... Yeah, Christy, yeah?
One thing you said, which the focus. It's always the mother always focuses on the baby, not on the birth pain.
Yes.
That's not what the focus is. I have to go She focuses on the baby.
That's right.
Always talks about the baby.
For sure. I think it was one of the points there, but this slide was becoming the previous slide was becoming too busy. So I took out that point, but the point was essentially, hopefully, the mom knows that there will be birth pains, I'm sure, but if she keeps focusing and obsessing about these birth pains, it will rob all her joy. She will not experience the beauty of pregnancy. She will not experience through all these difficulties, I'm sure. I mean, I'm speaking here as an ignorant man maybe on this topic, but still, I think, throughout all that, the focus is on the hope, the expectation, and you can hear that often in the conversations that new moms have. So, and that should be the same with us. All right. Let us quickly break up into groups, maybe, between 5 and 10 people in a group, as it's comfortable, and then let us not necessarily have long discussions. Let us use this time for prayer. And we can either, ask Father to help us to lay things down in our hearts that's stealing our attention, where our attention is maybe not on the right things, to help change us. The other possibilities are to pray for the world, essentially, to intercede for those who are not yet in this kingdom. So let us quickly break up into groups, and then we'll maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll close off.